General Jack Keane was on Fox a little while ago, and you, by the way, brilliant on Fox Primetime, very impressive, made the point. He said maybe another week or two. We see Hegseth has just sat down for a 60 Minutes interview, and he said we've learned the lessons of Iraq and Afghanistan. We hear on Fox, and obviously a lot of them are very connected. We can't let that battle creep get in. Do you see it as more of a short-term thing? And define that, I know. What's a piece of string?
Well, we know what Trump wants because finally a couple days ago he revealed what he wants in terms of outcomes. When he was sitting with Chancellor Merz in the Oval Office the other day, and he had a sort of ad hoc press avail there, he was asked about regime change. And his answer was it was a very Trumpian answer. He didn't answer the question directly. He just started sounding like he's rambling, but he's not. And he talked about the ideal of Venezuela. He praised the Venezuela situation and said, look what we did there. Yeah. And he said something very interesting. He said, look, we kept the government intact. They removed Maduro and started working with Delcy Rodriguez, who was Maduro's number 2. Yeah. And what that does, and I'm not saying this as a criticism, there's pros and cons to this. Although it throws the Venezuelan people under the bus, it seems, at least in the short term, it certainly doesn't embrace Maria Corina Machado, who won that election by a landslide. It chooses stability over democracy. And there's something to be said for that. Because if you say we're going to remove all the criminals, and then you end up with instability. So he compared Venezuela to Iraq, where in Iraq, when the Saddam Hussein regime fell, they went in and they cleared everyone out. They fired everybody. But that, of course, leads to all kinds of chaos, and ISIS grows out of that. So Trump was touting the Venezuela model as a way of keeping things stable, because you keep all the technocrats and bureaucrats in place, you keep the structure in place, everything continues to run, you decapitate it, and you move in and you work with those top people, and you hold a gun to their head and get them to behave. And that way now the question is what you do down the road. If Venezuela doesn't at some point under American supervision go to an actual democratic election, and the Americans long-term keep working with these Marxist criminals who were basically the Maduro regime criminals, mobsters who are running Venezuela, which is what the Americans are doing now. If that's what happens long-term, then the Venezuelan people are no freer than they were under Maduro, maybe a little freer. Yeah. But Trump wants the same thing in Iran. It's much cleaner. If you say we're going to purge everyone, then what happens? All the people in power, all the IRGC people are going to fight to the end. They're not. Yeah. But if you say to them, listen, if you cooperate with us, everything will be fine, and then you put some stability in there, that doesn't mean it moves to a democracy. The Americans want that. The Israelis might not be as satisfied with it. Yeah. But I can see Israel suddenly going, right now Israel's the golden boy. They're America's sidekick, and no one's criticizing them, and nobody's criticizing Israel because indirectly they'd be criticizing Trump. But what happens when America and the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Qataris say, okay, we're done, we're negotiating with these guys, and they work with the reformers in the regime in Iran, and Israel says, no, this is not good enough for us. Then suddenly Israel can become isolated like that.
Yeah, everything you say is brilliant. Do you think it makes a difference, and the point of difference from Venezuela to here, that Trump has been very public multiple times in his desire to help the Iranian people? Help is on its way. I am going to give you the opportunity. It's now on you to take back your country, take back your government. That would be a point where people could legitimately go at him for, if he pulled out and that wasn't at least an opportunity for them. But I am also acutely aware of the fact that just because you remove some bad guys, it doesn't mean that everyone else there is good, that the 90 million people are amazing. I know the vast majority doesn't support the current regime, but there's other evil people who are looking for a chance as well, isn't there, to move in? It's complex.
Yeah, well, this is Trump's blind spot. Trump's blind spot with everything he does in the Middle East is an assumption that these people have the same motivations that he does or that most Western people do. Yeah. And that is that, really in the end of the day, everyone just wants money and power. And it's not necessarily true. These are ideological people. And it's a mistake Westerners have been making forever. And that's why we think that bringing, like when Jared Kushner, shows, pictures of what Gaza could look like, and it looks kind of like Boca Raton, Florida, and you say like, oh, we're gonna give them a better life, and then you say, wait a second, these same people in Gaza still support Hamas, even though they're living in puddles and tents, so we think that economics matters more to people. So the problem with keeping the Iranian regime intact the way Trump wants to do and saying, don't worry, we'll pay them off and we'll make them all rich and everyone will be happy, is that they're still Shiite ideologues. So, no, there's a lot of ways this can go sideways. But one thing we have to keep in mind, I have a column coming out soon in the Jerusalem Post about the different options for regime change and how they're all not really good. Meaning this can go sideways in many different ways. But we have to keep in mind that no matter what happens in Iran, even if it gets chaotic, even if it turns into ethnic violence between different groups and the Kurds are carving out their piece and the MEK is carving out their piece, and even if it takes a while to stabilize, it is not as bad as the regime we had for 47 years. It's not as bad. No matter what outcome is, none of it will be as bad as that. The havoc that regime caused worldwide. And people don't talk enough about the fact that Hezbollah has bases of operation, training bases, and more in Venezuela, in Paraguay, all over South America. Hezbollah is a global organization, and the drug trafficking and the human trafficking and everything that they've been doing worldwide, the fact that the engine of that whole network is being dismantled right now, even if Iran turns into a chaotic place, which is very sad. But you know what? That's the reality. If a government does evil things, they invite destruction on their people. And that is a sad fact of life. In Nazi Germany, they learned that. In Imperial Japan, they learned that. And they're learning it in Iran. I feel bad for the Iranian people, but that's what happens. But none of it, no outcome of this war is as bad as the regime itself that we've been dealing with for the last 47 years. Especially since the end of the Iran-Iraq war. For the first while, when they had that 10-year or 11-year war with Iraq, they kind of kept each other busy, and they weren't as much of a threat. The real rising threat of Iran, with the proxies and the ballistic missiles, and then ultimately the drive to nuclear, all starts after the Iran-Iraq war. So if they end up getting distracted now with an internecine battles to see who gets to control the carcass of the Iranian regime afterwards, I feel bad for them, but it's still better than this regime.
I will wrap up because I've taken so much of your time and I'm very grateful. What percentage chance do you give of a Reza Pahlavi going into transition and the Iranian people democratically electing their next leader?
It depends on a few things. Well, first of all, how popular Reza Pahlavi actually is a matter of dispute. And unfortunately, I'm finding it very difficult, and I'm having conversations with some of the people on both sides of it. I'm having a very difficult time discerning the reality because it seems that everyone is so politically motivated. The pro-Pahlavi people have an interest in saying he's more popular than maybe he is, and the anti-Pahlavi people, the opposite. So it's very hard to get a sense of what's real, meaning there are indications that that his name carries a lot of weight and still is very popular. We saw that with the protests and the response to him. But others say, no, he doesn't, but he's been away for 4.5 decades and he doesn't really know the lay of the land. There's a lot of arguments for and against. It's very hard to discern. I think a lot of it will have to do with how active a role do the Americans take in what goes on afterwards. Because if they really take a hands-off approach and say, you guys sort it out, then I don't think Pahlavi has a chance because there's all these other militias and there's all these entrenched bureaucrats who are going to try to have a say. And there's a whole bureaucracy. Aaron, we have to remember, Iran is not Iraq, Syria, or Libya. Those places were tiny little countries where the dictatorship was basically a mafia family. In other words, Bashar Assad gets on a plane and flies to Russia. That's the end of the Syrian regime. It doesn't work that way in Iran. The IRGC is around 180, 190,000 men, and that's just the IRGC. All the bureaucrats in the system are not technically IRGC, but they are. And then you have their families. So think of it more as a political party, an elite class of probably between 750,000 and 1 million people that oppresses the rest of the population. It's much more similar to the Chinese Communist Party than it is to a little despotic dictatorship like Libya or Syria. So removing the regime is not such a simple matter.
Final thing, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance post-President Trump's second term?
Well, I just think that when Marco Rubio stood up to the mic the other day and spoke in Spanish, he reminded everyone that the GOP that is right now bleeding minorities is going to be saved by Marco Rubio, because if he's the presidential candidate, he will sweep across Texas, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, and he'll speak Spanish and he'll sweep everyone off their feet. J.D. Vance, I just, without saying what I like or dislike, I don't think J.D. Vance has a chance of winning a presidential election.